Okay, next on our agenda is the intersection evaluation report, and with us this evening we have Town Engineer Paul Vlasich. Hi, Paul.
Good evening. Paul Vlasich, Town Engineer. Back in the town warrant 2019, the town approved a intersection study for $50,000. And we started that in 2020, and right about the same time as COVID hit. So we have a draft final report, and there's been changes to that draft since October on the town website. And so this is a discussion of some of our findings. And with us tonight is the project manager, Greg Bakos from VHB.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. What I'll provide is a summary of our findings and recommendations. And let's see if this works. So the project purpose was to conduct a town-wide study of the town-owned intersections, not state-owned, to inform decisions on future expenditure of capital improvements, and provide a base for further study. The data collection that we accomplished is reusable in the future as well. We primarily looked at traffic operations, how well is an intersection functioning, as well as safety. And I would say that we found that the safety was more of the overarching criteria as compared to operations. Operations are important, but we found that that was more of a background type factor as opposed to safety. We started by collecting crash data. And we also examined the recommendations of the 2018 master plan and the 2019 warrant article on the intersections. For the traffic operations piece, we did kind of a high-level overview of operations. As Paul mentioned, we started our study right about when the COVID shutdown happened. So we weren't going to be collecting any new data for quite a while. But we were able to rely on historical data to look qualitatively at what intersections were doing, how they were performing, where the delays were. And we mapped that based on morning and evening peak hour delays and that sort of thing. We also did field observations. We went out to the intersections, our traffic engineers did. And we, of course, accepted town input, Paul and his group, what they observe on a daily basis. This is just an example of one of the maps. We actually took Google data, Google traffic data, that you can go back in time and look at a specific day of the week. This was a Tuesday at 8 a.m. And it colors the roadways based on the traffic operations. Green being great, orange being okay, and at this particular day there were no red. So this allowed us to look pre-COVID at some of the conditions out there. So then the safety analysis. We collected 88 intersections that had at least one crash. There were intersections that have none, so they didn't show up. We accepted input from the town police and again the town staff on what they observe as being the problem intersections. We again conducted field observations to see what kinds of things are contributing to those crashes, be it geometry or traffic controls like stop signs, yield signs, or are there sight distance concerns? And we found that at some of the intersections. So we did a little more data gathering besides just the crash data. We then ranked all the intersections based on their 5-year crash history, and that actually is in your handout as one of the pages, has all 88 intersections listed. And then we cross-referenced that, like I mentioned earlier, to the intersections that were listed in the master plan as well as in the 2019 warrant. Here's just that list. I will note that the number of crashes is on the right for the study period, and it goes from a high of 41 all the way down to a bunch of ones. But the high is one of the state intersections, so we crossed that off the list. You'll note that number 2 is front at Water Street, where your bandstand is.
Could I just ask?
Yes.
Could you just, for the record, state what the time period was that you took this data?
Yeah, it's a 5-year period, and I forget the years. I think it ended in 2020, I believe. So it was 2020 and earlier. I think it was
Okay.
15 through 20, something like that. Yeah,
Okay.
it's in our study.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. And stop me at any time. So this is how the intersections within the master plan, they were identified as focus area intersections in the master plan, how they ranked. You can see the worst is Epping at Brentwood, and that's being addressed or has been addressed at 5, rank of 5 with 4 collisions per year. All the way down to Brentwood Road at Dogtown Road with only 0.2 collisions per year, ranking 85th. So, these were considered priority intersections in the master plan, but the crash data doesn't necessarily bear it out. Some did, some didn't. And again, crash data is only part of it, but we found it interesting. And then we looked at the 4 intersections that were part of the 2019 warrant article and how they ranked. And there is actually overlap. Some of these intersections were in the master plan as well. But again, there's quite a range. Water Street at Front Street had the second highest in town at 5.8 per year. And then all the way down to only 0.5. I want to point out one important consideration is that we did not get crash severity data. And I can get into that as we start talking about the alternatives that we studied. But I think that's important to note. And again, you shouldn't just look at the number of crashes. I think it's important to note, what types of crashes are happening at that intersection. So before I go further, it was decided by the town, after looking at all the data and our considerations, we did an initial report to the town with our initial findings. And the decision was, let's just focus on these 4 warrant article intersections. Let's draw some conceptual designs that would address the issues at those intersections, and then see how they look, see what kinds of opportunities there are to improve the conditions there. So that's what we did, and I'll go through each of the conceptual designs and some of the considerations. So the first one, and I'm doing these in descending order of crash history. So the worst one was Water at Front Street, and we looked at, what is contributing to the crash history there, and I think it's fairly obvious that there's a lot happening in a very small area. There's a lot of turning movements right up by the bandstand. There's heavy volumes at certain times of day, which leads to motorist frustration, risk-taking, and that sort of thing. You also have the bandstand itself, has a little bit of impact on sight lines, especially for the northbound motorists that are taking a left. They can appear, if they do it too quickly, they can appear out of nowhere for a vehicle that's going east. You also have diagonal parking on the north side, very close to the travel lane. Those dimensions where the diagonal parking are typically too narrow to have this kind of a setup. It is what it is in a downtown, but we wouldn't design it that way if we had a clean slate. We would provide more room. Or we would change the angle of those diagonal spaces so that they're a little more angled, so that the cars aren't backing out quite so perpendicularly. And as Paul mentioned to me today, he's observed vehicles going east on Water Street, pulling a U-turn to pull into those spaces. So the more you angle them, the less attractive that is, or the harder it is to do that. But I kind of digress here. The crash numbers are relatively high at this intersection. It's actually several intersections combined. But I think I'm guessing anyway, the severity is pretty low. I'm guessing these are mostly fender benders that you're seeing. It's low speed, high volume, low speed conditions. So we looked at, it's really laid out well. The last project that went through did a really nice job doing some of the curb extensions on the sidewalks, really clarifying where the crosswalks are, putting a stop sign or stop line and a stop sign across Water Street as it enters the intersection eastbound, I think was huge. That forces people to stop and then go, and it provides gaps for some of the turning vehicles. It's really not bad. And we were struggling to come up with ideas on what could you do to improve it without totally revamping the whole intersection. And, we were told from the beginning, don't talk about moving the bandstand. Probably not a good idea. So we're not doing that. We looked at a few things, reversing directions on Front Street. Nothing really seemed to work out. We came up with some small improvements. What this shows up by the bandstand is the area that is currently striped out around the bandstand. We were saying, why don't we make that more of a physical, not a barrier, but something that people wouldn't want to drive over, like cobblestones, something like that, to force them a little further away from the bandstand so they're not sneaking around the corner invisibly to oncoming traffic. It's a small thing, it might help. We did read that down at the bottom, that there are occasions when motorists are confused and they might go up the left side if they're heading north. So we're saying, all right, let's add a little more physical separation and have more, maybe a raised median, or again, those cobblestones down the bottom, to make it a little more clear that, yeah, you stay to the right, and that sort of thing. And then lastly, we looked at restriping that diagonal parking to be a little more of a severe angle, so that cars aren't backing out quite so, perpendicular to the curb, that come out at a more of an angle, and they'd be able to see a little better too when they do that for the car next to them. The price of that is you might lose a few parking spaces to do that, to restripe it. So that was the extent of our recommendation. Low cost, typically. It depends on if you do those cobblestones, that's pretty pricey. It's a permanent solution. So that was pretty much it. So the summary of that is minimal improvement potential without major reconfiguration. The improvements we're showing are relatively low cost. And we said, take another look at that diagonal parking. If you don't do the cobblestone treatment, the diagonal parking might be one way of reducing some of the crashes. And I guess I'd want to take a deeper dive, maybe talk to the police. Is the diagonal parking actually contributing to crashes? I'm assuming it is, but maybe it's not.
Before you go any further,
Yes.
I'm sorry, could you go back one slide?
Yep.
There's a circle in front of the bandstand. There's a circle and then an odd, what is that? Is that?
That's a shadow.
Oh, okay. You know why? Because
Yep.
coming around there, sometimes pedestrians cross there. That's why I was
Ah,
asking.
okay.
If there was something that I've missed.
Yep,
Because
nope.
that gets a little dangerous there sometimes.
For sure, yeah.
Thank you.
So on that note, can I ask a quick question
Yeah.
then? Was it discussed, the lack of a crosswalk actually there? Because people do walk onto the, so I never understood how that was a possibility, that there's no direct crosswalk to the bandstand, but it's obvious that people should be going to the bandstand.
Yep.
Did that come up in discussion?
It didn't really, because, there is down sort of in the middle of the picture, there's a crosswalk going across Front Street, and then that cross-hatched area is an area where pedestrians could walk,
Yeah.
relatively safely. It's not going to prevent them from crossing from all different locations, though, I'm sure.
Of course, yeah.
Line of sight is a little tough there.
Sorry?
Line of sight is a little difficult
Absolutely.
there.
Yep.
Thank you.
That left-hand turn is a nightmare.
Approximately how many parking spaces do you think would be forfeited?
I think, it does not look like it was drawn to scale, but I'm going to say 1 to 2.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
So the next intersection in terms of crash history was Front Street at Pine and Linden. And this is the existing condition plan, and it's pretty obvious the concern there is coming out of Pine and Linden, there's a wide open paved area. And, call it a free-for-all. There's conflicting movements there, confusion undoubtedly. And this is a location where, coming out of either Lincoln or Pine, you're going to have to move all the way up, to be able to see before you come out. And the stop lines are way back. So you're going to hang out across crosswalks, or you're going to be in no man's land where you're in the way of something, And so it's just the way the geometry is, the existing layout. And that point I made earlier about crash severity, I would envision this one as having a higher likelihood of, severe crashes, because somebody may time it wrong coming out from that side street. And Front Street is free flow, so cars are going, it's a pretty straight shot, cars are going faster. So that would be our concern here. So not only was it the second highest ranking from a crash history among these 4, but I would say it's probably, more susceptible to severe crashes. So, and I would note how far apart the crosswalks are at each end. There's a church with all that parking above it. So there are times when there's a lot of pedestrian activity. There's also a funeral home that they park along the street. So I think the pedestrian crossings are fairly spread out when you have 2 side streets coming in. This is the proposal that we are suggesting here. We did not come up with like a near-term interim low-cost solution because it seemed like it's really begging for geometric changes. And the roundabout solution accomplishes many things. You can see that there are better crosswalk locations. The crosswalks are safer because people are only crossing 1 lane at a time. There's a refuge island between the lanes. And I think importantly, it would slow down people on Front Street. It provides really good access to Pine and Lincoln Street without signalizing it. We don't believe signals would be warranted here in the first place, but it provides really good operations and vastly improved traffic safety. So those are the benefits. It's certainly not an inexpensive solution. It's a fair amount of construction here to build a roundabout. And we were discussing earlier that the town doesn't have a roundabout yet. So it'd be interesting to see how people feel about them. But we're proponents of roundabouts where they make sense. And this is a location where I think it makes sense. You can see that there would be a little bit of property impact in the bottom triangular area there. And then up in the corner, there'd be a little bit of right-of-way acquisition, but pretty minor.
I think we have a couple questions here.
Yeah, okay.
Selectwoman.
Yep.
No, the roundabout has been what I've wanted forever. So I like that, and my concern was, the taking of Gale Park and whatnot. And I had another thought, but it's gone. So,
The park, did you say the park?
yeah.
Yeah, so there's very little impact to the park. You can see, actually, I have a label. It says no impacts within park.
No, there it is, right there.
Because I knew you'd ask that question. No. There's a little bit of grass that'd be taken within public property on the
Yeah.
corners. But where that arrow is pointing, I believe, is a little wall that kind of denotes where the park proper is. And we're not planning to touch that, so.
What kind of signage would have to go with that to get people from Front Street to understand how they go to get to Linden Street?
Yeah, we frequently will have advanced signing that has a symbol of a roundabout with arrows, and the arrows each have a street name on them, so that in advance you'd figure out, where you're heading. So, yep.
I know it's not directly on the road to the school, but have there been, like, questions or data about school children's safety and crossing there, do you know?
It hasn't come to our attention, but again, I think this would improve that in any direction. If you go back to what's there, you know, you have crossings on Front Street, the full width of the road. So, and I don't know if they have crossing guards for the
They
school,
do, yeah.
school kids. Okay, that's helpful, yeah.
But it's only,
It's not, yeah, it's not.
right, it's
further up.
across. Well, no, it goes from Front Street, from that corner over to Lincoln Street.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's nobody
There's
else
nobody
down
on
there.
there. Right.
Okay. Any other questions?
No, I like that fact that it fits so well in there.
I know, it does fit. a
Yeah,
lot.
And so like a bus going in the roundabout, size-wise is,
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned that because it's tight. You know, this is at the small end of one-lane roundabouts, you know, for the recommended sizes. But it's also, I think, compatible with the context here. You don't want a huge one that people can go around faster. You want it to be tight. But we did examine not just buses. Actually, buses turn very well, but tractor trailers. You know, can they make all these turns? You notice towards the middle of the roundabout, there's a hatched area. Those would be like cobblestones as well that automobiles wouldn't want to ride on, but tractor trailers can drag their rear wheels around to, you know, so it's called a truck apron, and it allows large vehicles to get around.
So if I could just, because
Yep.
both of those questions were along where I was going. I really like the roundabout idea for this intersection, but I believe that entrance into Lincoln Street is the biggest primary access that the school buses take to Lincoln Street. So,
Oh, there's a bus now.
so how, I understand your answer on the roundabout, but during the construction, I mean, keeping that in mind, I mean, how would that impact?
Yeah, construction of roundabouts is a challenge. We're doing 2 in Concord right now and on a state route. And it takes, you know, a lot of thought on how you phase the work. And it typically involves riding over temporary pavements, things like that. It even involves night work at times when there's certain operations that you just can't do during the day when there's buses or
Yeah.
that sort of thing. You know, most projects get built during the summer, so fortunately it avoids most of the school year.
Good.
But those are valid concerns, you know, they're not that easy to phase. And there are alternative routes, there are side streets that we could do detours during really bad, you know, phases, but,
Okay, good, thank you.
yep.
Selectwoman Gilman?
Yeah, we did do a roundabout tryout around the bandstand.
Yes,
That was about, I'm going to say 15, 18 years ago.
yep,
And it was not well approved by the people, but there was also some obstruction to it by people chatting, stopping in the roundabout to chat with somebody that, you know, how do you like this? So it seemed to, it kind of died on the vine because the experience that people who weren't stopping to chat got stopped anyway, so.
yeah. It's a tough thing, you know, if people aren't used to driving them, they need it to be proven to them that they work, you know. And I think there's so many around New Hampshire now that most people have been
Yeah.
through roundabouts and don't use the Portsmouth Circle example, use more of a, you know, modern,
Lee.
small round. Lee, yeah. So I'll move on.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
yeah.
Please.
So the minimum parking loss is, from what I can tell, is in front of the academy, the end. But what about the other side of the street where there are a few houses and the parking for the church, their parking lot? Would that be affected at all by this?
I don't believe there's on-street parking
It's
in
not-
the intersection.
Yeah, I'm more worried about
For
their driveways.
The driveway is off to the left here.
Yeah.
You can see it. So I know when they exit, I'm sure it's en masse, you know, they
Oh,
probably
yeah,
come
but
out.
I don't know how much, the configuration and how that would work with a circle.
Yeah, it should be fine, you know, they're
Far enough
gonna
away.
have to time it, they're gonna have to wait a little bit.
Yeah.
We haven't restricted access to them.
Okay.
We've maintained access to the one driveway, private driveway in the intersection.
And that's what that little jet out is?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right.
Yep, so we haven't taken access away from anybody, yep.
Okay, thank you.
I do understand that the funeral home, there are times when people park up and down the street, and they're gonna have to be restricted once they get within a certain distance of the roundabout. They can't block it, so, but there's still gonna be on-street parking
Yeah,
for them.
And it's been my experience that a lot of that, where you're talking about, is from in events too.
Ah.
And the funeral home, they tend to park further down.
Further down, okay.
Sorry.
Yep, good.
But that's just been my observation through
okay.
the years. Thank you.
So some of the considerations, it definitely slows traffic on Front Street. It improves access to the side streets, improves pedestrian access, will greatly reduce crash severity. There are minor impacts. The construction cost in 2021, we estimated at $550,000, and I bring this up for all of these alternatives that the construction industry is upside down right now, and I didn't even want to put a number on it. I just said, here's what 2021 was. Who knows when you're ready to construct this, what things will be like. But, we've seen crazy escalation. And so I'm sure it's north of 550, but we don't know where it's going to land. And as I mentioned earlier, we didn't find a low-cost alternative at this intersection. The next one is water at High, Clifford, and Franklin Streets. And the issues here are similar to the last one in that you have an awkward geometry coming into the main road. You have two roads coming in at angles. Actually, Franklin's leaving, Clifford's coming in. And you have that no man's land again as you're approaching High Street. So the crashes here are due to the conflicts, the unusual angle, and again, high volumes on High Street during certain times of day could be leading to risk-taking and just poor judgment, that sort of thing. We also noted that if you're coming from the west on Water Street, going into Franklin Street, it's a very flat curve and very easy to go fast. Not advisable because you're just going to Franklin Street, but you could come around that corner a little quickly as somebody is coming up on Clifford trying to inch out. So there's definitely concerns here. So here we did find some lower cost improvements. You'll notice on that left corner, bumping the curb out, similar to what they've done near the bandstand, to slow that right turn down coming off of High onto Franklin. Also bumping out the nose between Franklin and Clifford to shorten the crosswalk distances through here. But otherwise, there was not a lot geometrically that we could do and still maintain access for cars and, larger vehicles like buses and trucks. So minor impacts, minor costs, but minor improvement as well. We also looked at what if you reversed the directions of the two side streets so that Franklin would come out, Clifford would come down. That would eliminate those two roads crossing each other. Because Franklin, there would still be a prohibition on taking a left, so you could only come up Franklin and take a right, and then people coming into Clifford wouldn't cross that path. We thought this was a great idea until Jen pointed out that this used to be that used to be the configuration, and it was found that a lot of cars were taking the left, heading westbound on High Street to come down Clifford to get into the downtown here. And as a result of that, they would frequently have to sit and wait to take that left. And that would back cars up on High Street, again, leading to congestion, frustration, and risk-taking. So we have second thoughts about this solution. I think it would need to be studied further, but it sounds like it's already been done and the town flipped it. So we probably wouldn't recommend it. So the alterations we propose are minor, but they're relatively minor cost. and the reverse direction alternative has potential side effects that are undesirable. The next intersection is Winter at Railroad in Columbus. Like some of the others, you have skewed geometries that are leading to bad sight distances. You also have unrestricted higher speed movements. So, coming down Winter Street onto Winter Street, there's no stop needed, so cars kind of swoop around that corner and don't really need to, and don't slow down. And then same thing on Railroad Ave, that's that's free flow, unrestricted. So it's coming out of the side streets that are the problem. Coming out of Columbus is difficult. You have sightline issues. Winter Street northbound is probably the bigger problem, where you have a fair number of vehicles heading north, coming to a stop line, and then having to look over their right shoulder through the trees in the park to see if somebody's coming on Railroad. So the geometry is really contributing to the concerns at this intersection. And again, this would probably be one of those cases where the severity of the crashes is relatively high compared to some of the others. Here we did see a few minor improvements that could be made. Kicking out those curb lines a little bit, it allows the northbound Winter Street driver to inch up a little further than they can today, and still be protected by a curb. It forces the southbound Winter Street cars to slow down and deflect a little bit around the Columbus Ave vehicles as they come out. So it's a minor improvement, but it's something, to help sight lines and vehicle behavior. And then a roundabout fits here too. Very similar to the other one as far as size goes. It definitely would slow vehicles down. It provides safer and better access from all approaches. So this would be the long-term improvement for this intersection. And then the third alternative was, don't put a roundabout, but change the geometry of Winter Street. It basically creates a T intersection. It's something everybody's familiar with. It's very straightforward. It forces the Winter Street traffic to come to a stop, and the northbound Winter Street traffic to come to a stop, and then they have really good sight lines in both directions. The southbound Winter Street traffic, if they want to continue on Winter, they don't have to stop, but they would definitely have to slow down, which they don't do today. So it definitely accomplishes safety improvements, and it is less costly than the roundabout. It doesn't have all the attributes as far as slowing all the vehicles down, but it would definitely be an improvement from what's there today. Yeah, I would mention that it cuts across the park where the cannon is, but that's maybe, can be managed.
Movable.
I'm curious about the thoughts from this side of the room.
I'm here, but I'll wait my turn.
Yeah, the Columbus Ave line of sight coming out of there, does that improve?
That's improved, yeah, because it's a straight line now. That when they come out, they'll be able to see in both directions as opposed to being on the inside of a curve. So,
Well, and there's also the problem with that fence that's on the
yeah,
corner
today,
of-
yep. Yep, so pulling it out a little bit improves that.
Improves that
Yep.
sightline.
Yep,
And what is the cost differential between this and the first one?
glad you asked. It's about half,
Okay,
yeah, compared to the roundabout.
yeah.
And I didn't price the minor improvement one. That's going to be, very small dollars, yep.
Now, I know that you're configuring these based on today's traffic. But I look at it and I know that Railroad Avenue used to be that name all the way out to Epping Road historically. So Winter Street was its own separate thing and started from where the cannon is and went out to Front Street. So in this one, we'll have Winter Street come in, you have a stop sign, which we currently do, and then you turn left onto Winter Street.
Yeah, it is a little unusual. You'd have to think about the naming and
Yeah.
how that would all work, yep.
Yeah, we'll have to ask the chief about that, right?
And that's it as far as our presentation, but I think, we want to entertain input and questions.
So we'll open it up to the public for questions, and we'll bring it back to the board.
Okay.
So I'll ask you to stand by. come on up. And if you would just state your name, please, and
Yeah,
address
yeah.
for the record.
Leslie Haslam, I'm a resident of Columbus Avenue. I've lived there for 40 years this summer, so I've seen a lot of change. I am thrilled to see this on the big screen, because I did go on the website after having had a helpful phone conversation, where'd he go? With our town engineer, N.J. Perkins, who directed me to that. Before we get into those, I have a very fundamental question to ask, because I also came before you, thank you, Select Board and Town Manager, about the other end of Columbus Avenue, which appears to be water under the bridge at this point. This is a very different process, and I want to make sure I understand this correctly. What happened at the Brentwood Road, Columbus Ave, Epping Road intersection was a grant-funded deal, and this is not, these ideas are not. And I guess my fundamental question is there going to be, with any of these intersections, more outreach, any outreach to the abutters, to those who live on those streets and in those spaces to get their input? Is that part of this process?
Yeah, so ultimately, whatever was decided, if any of these were decided to go on the CIP for the warrant article, then obviously we would have public meetings to get public comment, suggestions, ideas. We like it, we don't like it.
Right, okay.
Before it would be put on the warrant.
Okay, and how would that be advertised? I mean, you have to dig really hard to get at these plans now, and I was warned about that. Is there a standard procedure for communicating to the public other than something being posted on the website?
Yeah, there are several mechanisms, but obviously we've learned over the years, particularly last year when we had your neighborhood come forward. I mean, I think we would try to make sure that we communicated to as many abutters or folks that live in the neighborhoods, but certainly across town.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be, I think all of us on the board are committed to making sure we want public input.
Great, okay, good.
Because it's real easy to sit up here and that looks good, but we genuinely appreciate it when we have a packed room and people can civically and constructively and objectively offer input. It makes our jobs a lot easier. So we invite that.
Great, good. So I'm, as somebody who always votes as well, I was really glad, when this intersection study passed. I'm really happy to see these proposals. And I want to speak very strongly in favor of the roundabouts. I went on a trip 2 weeks ago to upstate New York to a community that's like suburbia Schenectady. My friends have lived there for a long time. There's a new roundabout that is part of their commute, and it impacts how they get home and how they go. It has completely transformed in such a positive way their community's life. And they said it took a little getting used to, but what a difference. I want to reference, there's a little roundabout in Newburyport when you go over the Chain Bridge. It's a terrific little roundabout. It makes so much sense. It costs more, yeah, but if it saves lives and it helps me feel safe coming in and out of my neighborhood, not just me, but all of us, I want to speak. I was happy to hear, Julie, for some of you to say, yay for the roundabouts. I'm all for it, and I will talk to my neighbors about it if need be. And I'm really grateful that this is out there and for the opportunity to give you my input. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Robert Ficara, 6 Columbus Avenue, Exeter. I had a question on the Winter Street Railroad Ave and Columbus. Not the roundabout, but the other option. Human nature, as traffic comes I'm not sure of north, south, whatever, coming from Park Street, or coming down Railroad Ave, cars travel awfully fast coming through there. And when you're coming from the Park Street direction on Winter Street, you have a little bit of a gauntlet that you're traveling through where the road gets very narrow. And then as you start to approach the area where Cody's is, all of a sudden, you know, it gives people the feeling they can start to go faster. So I believe that no matter what, whether there's a roundabout there or whether the enhanced intersection, my question is, what are the thoughts of putting stop signs? If there is no roundabout, if it's the other modified one, having stop signs on both Railroad Ave and Winter Street before getting to that intersection to slow that traffic down. Obviously, we were all teenagers once upon a time. When a certain school gets out on the other side of town, lunchtime coming through there down Railroad Ave is really bad. So I just didn't know if, you know, not going with the expense of doing a roundabout there, but the bump outs, would stop signs slow the traffic down and make it safer? I don't know how that fits in all the engineering, but that's my question. Thanks for your
I
time.
appreciate the question, Mr. Ficarra. I'll defer to the experts. You want to?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you.
It's actually not a bad idea. If I can go back. Yeah.
I've been studying it for 36 years.
So were you thinking of maybe having a stop sign up at the top before Columbus?
for a
Yeah,
second?
yeah.
So my thought was to have a stop sign here
Mm-hmm.
and a stop sign up at the end of that crosswalk.
Where, so, can I?
Of course.
jump in?
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Call it fun size. On the Winter Street side, Columbus Avenue, so Columbus Avenue could turn, Winter Street would have to stop before they get to Columbus Avenue. That would be huge.
That was my thought.
Yeah, if this is far superior to option one, there's no question about it. My other, while this slide is up, and Julie, this goes to your comment about the name. If this is ultimately where we go, I would really think it would make more sense to have this whole thing be named Railroad Avenue and that Winter Street is only this piece. I know it shakes people up, but we changed a bunch of street names not that long ago, so. And I just need to throw in one other question that I forgot to ask. With any of these, is there any plan to put a sidewalk on Railroad Avenue? Because there's this new lovely sidewalk, you know, that we can go all the way on Winter to Park, or to Epping Road, that got finished. But it is still exceedingly dangerous to walk from the end of Columbus Avenue to Front Street. So, just had to put that one out there.
Thank you.
On the stop sign question, I could see some benefit having the one up at the top to help vehicles coming out of Columbus, which is, you know, one of the concerning movements. We don't typically recommend just putting stop signs around towns for speed control. It's usually for other reasons. But it's certainly something that, you know, could be considered here. It would probably be, you know, a policy decision for your engineer and public works folks, but it may be valid for this location.
Yeah, I think slowing the traffic down on Winter Street, especially since the other end got blocked off, people who are having to come around are turning onto Columbus Avenue off of Winter Street at a high rate of speed. I
Oh.
think a lot of it's frustration.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a stop sign there, I think that would help. Having nothing to do with coming out of Columbus, but
Right.
just the fact that they take that turn and they're on the other side of the street. But to see the traffic coming down Railroad Ave at certain times of day, you know, I mean, you're the engineer, but I'll bet you they're doing 40 miles an hour, easy.
Sure, yep.
And having a stop sign there, you know, that stop sign will be slowing that traffic down for two intersections and a major driveway. I just think it would make sense to slow that traffic down. So thank you.
Thanks for the suggestion.
Any other public comment, questions? Then if not, I'll bring it back to the board.
So I'll just say that it's not in here, but the end of Railroad Ave, that speeding continues when they're pulling out onto Front Street. They barely stop. I live there, and it's dangerous. The danger continues. You guys have it worse, by far. But it is a tough area.
I mean, I agree about the roundabouts in general. What is the implication of having a roundabout there? Does the speed then slow down for everybody coming out of the roundabout? That's generally the,
Yep. The side effect is traffic calming in all directions. This one is a little unique because of the fact that it's a three-legged roundabout.
yeah.
It won't have as much of an effect as a four-legged. A four-legged, you're coming in, you have to make a 90-degree turn, and it really slows people down. You'll notice the Railroad Avenue approach, there's not a ton of deflection, not as much as we would like, but we're kind of limited by the fact that it's a three-legged. But people still yield. They have to yield when they're entering if they're circulating cars. So just by that nature, people tend to slow down.
Anybody else on the board? So, Mr. Dean, we have 4 intersections that we're looking at. Purpose this evening was to give us an update on the study. Are you looking for direction from the board, I'm sure, for the town to move forward with
Yeah, I think,
some or all or none of the options?
yeah, I would say eventually we want to come back to this again. What I would foresee is that we would take this set of recommendations and we would boil it down to a CIP request. And that at that point, we would go through our normal procedure with the CIP, with the budget committee and the planning board and so forth to see what emerges out of that process, unless the board is really supportive of maybe one idea on one slide. If that's the way you want to go, then that's how we would queue it up.
Well, I guess I'd be interested in maybe shaking up the process a little bit. We have time between now and when you present. Not a lot of time, but we do have time. And I think that there are folks around town who are passionate about at least 2 of these 4 intersections. And I think before we put it into the CIP and send it on its way to budget, perhaps having a select board meeting where we can advertise this and invite public for public input, I think. Rather than kind of doing it backwards and having budget look at it, select board, and then throwing it on a warrant, and at the 11th hour, folks are getting wind of it.
Yeah, and I thought about getting the Communications Advisory Committee involved as well. This seems like it would be in their bailiwick to be able to put the information together, package it, and get it to the most people possible, which is, I think, what we're trying to do. We want to have that input.
Yep.
So I know working with Bob Glowacki and his group, we could get it out on social media. We could get it into obviously the website is our big place where we advertise things. But there's some different options for us to take.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to get this out to as many people as possible and then, bring it before a select board meeting prior to budget season.
CIP.
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Can I add to
Please.
that? Is it possible to do what, say, the planning board does with notifying abutters to notify that neighborhood or these neighborhoods? I mean, I don't know. That's a lot of
Yeah,
neighborhoods,
we
right?
can,
But
we can look into that
I
and
know.
see
It's a lot,
what can
but-
be done.
I'm just, not
Well, I think
everyone
it's
looks
no,
at
it's not. I mean, it's. I agree with you 100%. It's not what we typically do. I know we're good at doing what we're obligated to do under the law, but I
Right.
think where folks have been talking about,
Letter
particularly these 2
something.
intersections for years, to find some postage in the budget to.
And the other idea is we could put out a survey and ask people what their preferred option would be, looking through this kind of,
Yeah. All
looking
of the
through this
above.
packet.
Yeah.
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 right?
I think it would
So,
be all, so, because not everybody does surveys either, or looks on our website, or,
Right.
I think a letter, something. We don't have to do a certified that's going to cost a small fortune, but
Right.
a letter to residents.
And the reality is, we can try all of the above: social media, notifying abutters,
Yeah.
communications committee, all of that. And the reality is, not everybody's going to show up. and then, after the fact, some people will show up. But I think we can make an extra effort to notify as many folks as possible to get their input. And I think
The planning department is really good at sending out mass mailings. So,
Every planner smile.
I know, it's true. It's true.
Thank you.
so. Circling back to the 4 intersections, it sounds like the first intersection, possibly minor improvements such as taking away a parking space or two to widen or change the position of the parking. The second intersection is to do the roundabout, would be the most expensive but safest, and probably would yield the best outcome for the community.
Right.
And then the Water Street, Clifford, Franklin, it sounds as if we need to
There's nothing to
just
do
look
there.
again, because there's not much to do there. And then I think with option 4, considering either the roundabout or the third option.
The T intersection.
Correct. So should we pledge to make an effort to try to bring this back sometime in July?
It is May 31st. That sounds right.
I'm just thinking September,
Yeah.
you're going to be putting together the budget.
Yep.
just
I
like
think
to
that's
do
great to have a
time.
follow-up discussion set up and notify people, get the word out about the meeting, and hopefully people will come.
Terrific.
Sounds
Thank you.
good.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you for your comments.
Consideration that it's summertime and people will be on vacation, so the more notice they have, the better. Thank you. Thank you.
Excuse me, can I make one comment on the intersection here before we go on to
Sure.
the next? We got the Phase 2 of the intersection program approved last year. So we have funding for the consultant to carry this further. Or we can use a portion of that money and also look at new intersections too, so that, there may be 3 more that we can look at. And waiting till September is we lose a lot of that time frame. So as a suggestion, I think that we can keep a stipend of funds to help with the engineer with the 4 intersections that we're talking about now. And also use some of that to tackle some of the master plan intersections that were not addressed yet. Does that sound like a decent way to move on this?
It does
that's
to me, unless
still-
you have an objection.
Yeah, my comment is I don't know if we need to hear more about those intersections in the master plan, or are you talking about bricks and mortar work, Paul?
I'm talking about what kind of improvements, just like a similar study to what just happened with these 4 intersections. There was 4 more that are in the master plan that haven't been touched yet. And we were thinking that that would be the Phase 2 money, but let's back off on maybe only doing a couple of those and still allow our consultants to have some effort for moving this forward.
Sounds reasonable to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, my comment on that was with the 50,000 that we have from just the last warrant.
Yep.
If some of these lower cost improvements, as we saw tonight, are favorable from the board's perspective, and I don't know how quick you want to move, but that is something that we could try to get done in a shorter window. So if you come to July, you have your second meeting, you have people come in, They talk about the intersections they want to talk about, and then we can decide, like, again, as the engineer stated, some of these intersections really only lend themselves to small capital improvements with hopefully some decent return on that.
Yep.
So just thinking about that as part of that 50,000, or, as we've talked about, some of this stuff, could it be done with ARPA funds? That's another avenue that we have. So, anyway, that's my comment on that.
Any other thoughts from the board?
And I don't know if Paul has an estimate off the top of his head, how much it would cost to have the 4 intersections in the master plan be looked at. Any idea how much that 50,000 would go to that?
We didn't go that far. We wanted to have this discussion first, because this could have gone many different ways.
Sure.
So is it reasonable to ask for one of our meetings in June for you to at least give Mr. Dean a memo or come back and answer that for us?
Sure.
Okay,
Sure.
great.
Yeah.
Okay,
Very good.
thank you.
Thank you.